Tonight, Trump's 6-month anniversary, Jared Kushner's congressional debut, and straight out of China. O.J. Simpson was granted parole and could get out of prison as early as October. He served 9 years of a 33-year sentence for armed robbery and kidnapping. The parole board's decision was unanimous.
I've always thought I've been pretty good with people, and I've basically spent a conflict-free life. You know, I'm not a guy that ever got into fights on the street and with the public and everybody.
Simpson was acquitted more than 20 years ago for the murders of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman. Opponents of President Nicolas Maduro erected barricades to enforce a 24-hour national strike in Venezuela that brought many streets to a standstill. Some protesters fought with police, who deployed tear gas and used water cannons. But many areas were deserted as Venezuelans heeded the opposition's call for a shutdown. 7 million people voted against Maduro and his plan to rewrite the Constitution in an unofficial referendum on Sunday. Elon Musk says he received, quote, verbal government approval to build an underground hyperloop connecting New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and D.C. The unproven technology would theoretically allow passengers to make the trip from New York to D.C. in just 29 minutes, in pods moving at up to 700 miles per hour through pressure-controlled tubes. This kind of system has been proposed around the world, but a functional hyperloop has yet to be open to the public. The White House says only that there have been, quote, positive conversations. ExxonMobil is suing the Treasury Department to fight a $2 million fine the department announced against the company earlier today. The Treasury Department fined Exxon for what it calls egregious violations of sanctions against Russia in May 2014, when now Secretary of State Rex Tillerson was CEO of the company. During that time, the company made a deal with Igor Sechin, head of Russian oil giant Rosneft, who had been blacklisted as part of sanctions meant to punish Russia for invading Ukraine. The fine is the maximum the Treasury can levy in a civil penalty.
Today marks 6 months of the Trump presidency. And by most conventional metrics, it really hasn't gone very well, even leaving aside Russia and the daily Twitter controversy. As a candidate, Trump promised 10 specific accomplishments within his first 100 days. We're now at day 180, and he's 0 for 10, even though his party controls the White House and both houses of Congress. But the reality is, Trump is succeeding on a smaller scale. Conservatives got a Supreme Court justice they love in Neil Gorsuch. This is a change to the system that will last for decades. Trump said he hated the nation's trade policy. And since taking office, he's halted the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and NAFTA is set to be renegotiated starting next month. Trump is shifting America's policy focus away from climate, which was an Obama administration priority. America is out of the Paris Accords, and the EPA is now promising to subject climate science to a panel of skeptics. Trump's campaign began with attacks on undocumented immigrants, and immigration was at the heart of his rise to power. 6 months in, arrests of undocumented immigrants are way up. On the campaign trail, Trump dismissed the Obama administration as anti-cop, pro-immigrant, pro-Black Lives Matter, and weak on drugs. His Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is already starting to make big changes to the way those laws are enforced.
We are returning to the enforcement of the laws as passed by Congress, plain and simple. If you are a drug trafficker, we will not look the other way.
In fact, the swift, sweeping changes to the criminal justice system at Sessions' DOJ might be the biggest accomplishment of Trump's first 6 months in office, which is weird, considering Trump now says he wishes he never picked Sessions for Attorney General in the first place. A lot of these changes, and lots of other smaller ones, fall under the category of what Trump advisor Steve Bannon calls the dismantling of the administrative state, eliminating regulations put in place by Democrats. That's been a conservative priority for decades. I spoke about Trump's track record with Diane Katz, who studies regulation at the Conservative Heritage Foundation.
Congress gets some credit because they have used a tool called the Congressional Review Act to actually repeal 14, soon to be, we hope, 15 regulations. And that's quite a lot because prior to this, the CRA was only used once.
But these ideas of these regulatory changes, the changes that happen sort of down in the government in the agencies, do they have an effect on the life of an average American? Or are people feeling those changes from this first 6 months?
They won't feel them yet. I mean, I don't think 6 months is long enough time. So I think it's going to take some time to determine whether or not these changes that have so far been, proposed, whether they will have long-term effects. I certainly hope so. But I do know that getting agencies to change and getting, actually not just agencies, but anything in Washington to change is excruciating.
Jared Kushner will testify before the Senate Intelligence Committee on Monday about his meetings with Russians with possible ties to the Kremlin. It comes at a time when some congressional Democrats have called for Kushner's security clearance to be revoked. They say he lied on a form he had to fill out in order to get his job as senior advisor to the president, omitting mention of more than 100 meetings he had with foreign officials. Kushner's lawyers say it was an honest mistake, and he's now amended the form. At the center of the controversy is the Questionnaire for National Security Positions, also known as Standard Form 86. It's the main tool the government uses to conduct background checks for security clearances. It's a daunting document, 127 pages long, designed to determine whether applicants are trustworthy and whether they've done anything that would make them subject to blackmail. This careful vetting of government employees first emerged during World War II. A host of security programs were created, from requiring civil servants to be fingerprinted to creating a commission on employee loyalty. The application for federal employment, which previously asked simple questions about employment history and references, was amended to include a question about membership in any organization advocating the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. As fear of the Soviet Union and homegrown espionage grew, so did the obsession with identifying security risks beforehand. President Eisenhower issued an executive order requiring that all federal employees be reliable, trustworthy, of good conduct and character, and of complete and unswerving loyalty to the United States, which would be determined by an investigation. Members of the armed forces were required to fill out a security questionnaire. Rather than focusing on qualifications, the questions were concerned with involvement in a list of prohibited organizations. The form also asked, have you ever been employed by a foreign government or any agency thereof? In the years that followed, the number of documents the government wanted to keep secret exploded, and so did the hoops you had to jump through to get a clearance. In 1995, SF-86 became the form used in all clearance investigations. And yet, it's not that hard to get a security clearance. 4.3 million individuals, including Kushner himself, now have one. But you can still get in trouble for omitting information on your form, like the DEA agents who were convicted of conspiracy and making false statements for failing to mention they owned a strip club. And you can also have your clearance revoked. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, famously lost his for having communist sympathies. It's strangely fitting that Kushner's contacts with Russians have gotten him in trouble because of a form originally designed to uncover contacts with Russians. But he does have an ace in the hole. The head of the agency you work for has the final say on whether you get to keep your clearance. And in Kushner's case, that just happens to be his father-in-law. The fact that Trump has put relatives in top jobs, both in the White House and in his businesses, makes him a target for ethics watchdogs. But to some in the entrepreneur community, the Trump name is still the gold standard of American success. Last year, the CEO of Trump Hotels and the president's sons, Donald Jr. and Eric, announced big plans, the creation of 2 new hospitality brands meant to expand the family's portfolio. the downmarket American Idea line, and a 4-star luxury line called Scion. Scion deals fell through in major cities. But the company did find a willing taker in tiny Cleveland, Mississippi. It's here, in this 12,000-person town, that a family that models itself on the Trumps will try to bring the first family's new vision to life.
This is the first Scion hotel in America, or at least it will be. It might not look like much now, but soon the rear walls will be replaced with sliding glass doors that'll open to the poolside cabanas. A 13-room statehouse will sit in the back of the property, along with the spa, and out front, on the lagoon, a dock for patrons to, quote, eat, drink, and be merry.
So this is actually going to change.
Dinesh Chawla, the CEO of Chawla Hotels, took us around the Scion with his head of development and operations. He and his brother Suresh own the hotel, but the Trumps have operational control. The financial terms of the agreement are confidential, but the Trumps were paid a consulting fee and they'll earn a percentage of profits. The Chawlas have already spent $20 million building this property, and the additions the Trumps want will cost them another $1.5. But one thing they won't be getting for their money is the actual Trump name.
Would you have preferred that it was Trump's American Idea or Trump's Scion Hotel so it did carry, the weight of that brand?
No, I think it would have been more of a distraction. If the president puts out a tweet, I think so much energy is put into dissolving what each verb and adjective means.
Even without the name, the Chawlas think the connection to Donald Trump is worth it.
When I was an MBA student in the 80s, he was one of the men. He was a swashbuckler who was reinventing the Manhattan skyline and taking old buildings and doing something with them. And so he's always been somebody that, I thought was very successful and worth emulating on the business front.
But the Chawlas had another connection to the Trumps. In 1988, a convenience store owner cold-called Donald Trump. He wanted Trump to loan him nearly $500,000 to open a hotel in Greenwood, Mississippi. His name was Dr. V.K. Chawla, and he was Dinesh's father.
He never said anything to anybody. Nobody knew what happened until Donald Trump called back the next day. And my mother answered the phone and said, there's a call from Donald Trump's office.
You're like, this is a prank?
Well, no. He said right away, let me take the call.
What was the advice that he gave your father?
He said, on one hand, you've led a very interesting life. You've accomplished a lot, and you've seen part of the American dream, and I know you'll make it if you keep at it. But he told him to stop sticking with the conventional financing angle. And Dad took his advice to heart, and 3 months later, he got the financing.
Chawla's dad hadn't just seen the American dream, he'd lived it. His father and 2 brothers were killed during violent clashes in the fight for Indian independence. As a kid, Chawla's father spent almost 10 years in a refugee camp. He left India in 1965 for Canada, where he eventually earned a PhD in chemistry before moving to the US. He passed away 2 years ago.
The day we arrived was July 7th, 1977, which is 7/7/77. Lucky day for us. We came here because my father, he was a scientist. He'd done well in government research and he was becoming very prominent. But he hit a ceiling because of some racial discrimination issues in Canada. So, like anybody who's trying to leave a racial discrimination type environment, we moved to Mississippi. Yeah.
Dr. Chawla opened his first hotel in 1989. Now the family empire consists of 17 properties throughout the Mississippi Delta. But the Scion is the most expensive, ambitious project the Chawlas have ever done.
For people that say that this is a terrible idea and this is risky and this is a bad investment, what have you said to them?
I don't need 300 million people to back my idea. I need 100 people staying in 100 rooms to back the idea on a nightly basis.
The deal certainly is different. Cleveland isn't exactly Trump country. In fact, it's overwhelmingly Democratic. And if the idea is to attract outside visitors, they're looking at a 2-hour drive from any major airport. As for the main attractions in Cleveland, there's Delta State University and the Grammy Museum, which hosts about 150 people a day.
They've never been in a non-luxury market. They've never been in Mississippi. So why did you think they would know what was best for Cleveland?
They don't know what's best for Cleveland. They know what's best for a particular type of guest. And the type of guest that they're trying to bring to the area is the same type of guests we're doing. The kind of publicity that we're getting and the resources that they're bringing to the table make it more likely to be a success than if we had just gone out there and pounded the pavement, hat in hand saying, give us a shot.
Maine has one of the highest overdose rates in the country.
Mr. Speaker, no one living in Maine today can ignore the addiction epidemic that is upon us.
And the state has responded aggressively by passing one of the nation's strictest laws on prescribing opioids. It caps most patients at 100 milligrams per day. But the law has had unintended consequences. Hundreds of chronic pain sufferers are now finding it impossible to access their typical dosage. After some Mainers pushed back on these restrictions, lawmakers said these patients could qualify for higher doses under what's called the palliative care exemption. Despite the assurances, though, patients are still struggling to find doctors who will give them the medicine they need.
This is what I've done for a long time, and I'm nowhere near ready to give it up, back pain or not. And as long as I can control the pain issues that I have to deal with, then I can keep doing this. They passed this law and they put it through very fast. No matter if your leg has been amputated or if you got a bad back or whatever the reason, everybody was getting the same. In January, they took 1 pill away, and that wasn't too bad. I could deal with that. But then when it got down to, that they had taken 5 away per day, and I get so that I went home after lunch. When I was in Augusta at that hearing, they told me that I come under the palliative care exception to the law, and go back and tell your doctor that, and you'll be all set. My doctor didn't want to hear that, and a lot of other ones didn't either.
I don't know of any other doctor in Knox County. I know that the patients that I took on did have doctors in Knox County, but basically the doctors pushed them out. Why don't I work on a refill for you? Anything else I can do for you today?
We need help. You could come to work for us.
I don't know that I like being up on the roof.
Yeah.
With this legislation, there were humble apologies that the law was misunderstood, that all these chronic pain patients didn't need to be tapered down after all, and that in fact, the doctors, all they have to do is invoke the palliative medicine exception. But despite that, the doctors continue to look for any excuse to get rid of these patients. And I think many of them use that regulation as sort of the last step in the process to shed them. There's a culture that seems to have developed that any doctor who prescribes a controlled substance is a bad doctor. And they don't want to be seen by their peers as someone who's like dispensing these things. So any patient they have who asks for them, the patient is then labeled as a drug addict. Not under my watch, you're not going to get it from me.
One of those free things, just coming home from the grocery store. I was gonna take my truck, but to save on gas, I took the car, and thank God my kids weren't in there, or my better half wasn't in there. 37 surgeries later, still alive. And I know Mainers pride themselves on being tough, and I'm pretty tough, and I still can't handle what I'm going through.
Here, can you bring this to her?
I tend to exclude myself a lot because it's just toxic sometimes to be around it, and they don't need to put up with that. I can function when I have the right amount. I can go to hall and, be a man and take care of my family. I mean, we've begged and pleaded, crying to the doctor, begging her, it's like, no, can't help you.
Any other things?
I guess the pain.
Okay.
What's the prognosis on that?
So it is still, we're still not getting any word from the board that they're changing their view. So I can't risk my license by going over 100 milligrams.
You don't think I qualify for the exemption, yes or no?
If I am basing my interpretation or what I've got trained that palliative care is life limiting, end of life, then no.
I've called 57 physicians in the state of Maine. The nearest appointment that I found is December out of 57. I got Dr. Mendel's number. He was definitely sympathetic, but he's retiring, so he can't take on any new patients.
In my practice, I treat about 120 patients. About 10 have chronic pain. 100 of them have drug addiction. When did you take your last?
Yesterday.
No one wants to take care of anybody with addiction. Nobody wants to take care of anybody with chronic pain. And so there's a lot of orphans out there. They're treated like the lepers of our time.
We are set.
Thanks, Tom.
I'm working 7 days a week, but we need more help. I can't do this alone. I will retire, and who will take care of the patients then?
Thanks.
Chester Bennington, lead singer-songwriter of the band Linkin Park, was found dead in Los Angeles Thursday morning. His death is being investigated as a suicide. Bennington had struggled with depression and drug addiction and had never shied away from dealing with them in his music. The singer was also deeply affected by the death of musician Chris Cornell, who committed suicide in May. Today was Cornell's birthday. Bennington was 41 years old. He leaves behind 6 children.
Sounds like they're just saying ching chang chong. My chance new girl watch made in China. We play ping pong ball made in China.
Made in China的关水， Made in China 被挑衅， Made in China 的货，老百姓用的开心。
What's up? Welcome to the CDC house. It's a Wi-Fi name. It's Higher Brother.
Oh yeah, that's the logo, right?
Yeah, that's just their logo.
Did Higher Brothers, did it really come from that?
Yeah, it's higher. 只是我们灵感的来源，但是我们不会延续它的，他们还是好好做家电比较好。
The Higher Brothers, a 4-man hip-hop group named after a Chinese appliance company, is based out of this apartment in Chengdu. This is where they eat, sleep, and record songs. Despite being from China, they're way more known abroad because of YouTube. But YouTube is banned in China, so they have to use proxy software just to see people's reactions.
What kind of comments do you get?
They say, oh, you guys Ching Chong brothers.
Ching Chan Chong.
你可以生气吗？
Nah. Chinese, yo, Chinese is more, 说得更难听。
Chinese can speak.
Can kill your heart.
Can kill your heart. Can you hurt?
他们说什么？
你们去找一个工作，好好的努力，挣钱盖洋房、买彩电、娶媳妇儿，都是这种又特别难听。
The Higher Brothers have a large U.S. audience thanks in large part to their manager, Sean Miyashiro, who's based in L.A. They've never met in person and have to rely on video calls to communicate.
Yo, what's up, Sean?
What's up, Sean?
So, when you can bring us to America, huh?
I'm going to, bro. I promise you. I promise. Maybe like after the Asia tour, we can bring you to America in October. I'll work on it right now.
You mean this year? It sounds possible, huh?
It's possible, bro. Yeah. Everybody loves you here too, bro.
Sean started working with the Higher Brothers in 2016 through his company 88 Rising.
How did you get hooked up with Higher Brothers?
One of our employees just showed me their Black Cat video.
don't know, I just immediately got like a Race Drummer vibe. They were killing it. And I was like, this is the first time I've heard Chinese rap sound good. I just was like, yo, can we like bring this to the world over here in America?
I mean, Chinese artists don't typically do well in the mainstream, period, of America across genres. We're not even talking hip hop.
That's what we're trying to change.
This isn't the first Asian act his company's worked with.
We just moved in, and we're just gonna like have a bunch of motherfuckers making shit in here. That's what we're gonna be doing. This is the epicenter.
This is a media company, though. It's not a record label. It's like kind of hard to wrap your head around what this is.
It's everything. It's everything. We literally have artist management, record label, people editing a video. Yo, what are you doing, bro?
Just making like little clips and memes.
See, that's actually exactly what people are gonna be doing here, is making clips and memes, bro. We're a meme factory.
And you don't wanna fuck with a chicken like me.
88 Rising is also behind the viral success of Rich Chigga, who's from Indonesia. And they've also been working with Korean rapper Keith 8. The one thread holding everything together is that their main talent pool is all Asian.
I kind of just naturally saw that there was all this talent, all this culture, expression coming from all the different countries in Asia, but there was no like central place and to kind of celebrate that. You see a lot of people griping about like, you know, the whitewashing of Hollywood and very little Asian representation in entertainment and stuff like that. And I think that our philosophy is the way to kind of break out of that is be really fucking good at what you do. Be undeniable and do it yourself.
The Hire brothers are undeniably good at what they do. At the Shanghai stop in their last tour, the venue was packed.
我喜欢它比较小众化一点，因为大家都喜欢，那就没意思，真没意思。
然后你看现在人这么多，我很少在毛门口看到这么多人。Hi Brothers 现在怕买不到票。
If you've ever been to a hip-hop show in the US, the scene might look familiar. Everything from the beats, to the dance moves, to the hairstyles is pretty much the same. Except, everyone's Chinese.
I've seen this on some of the YouTube comments. People saying like, here's some Asian dudes, they're stealing black culture. What do y'all think about that?
We learn it's black culture, so we study from them. And now it's 2017. The world is more closed. Black people watch Japanese cartoon. We listen hip-hop, it's same thing. We're more closed.
That's Vice News Tonight for Thursday, July 20th. Tune in tomorrow night for the award-winning documentary series, Vice.
The world order has been upended. Weak states threaten global stability as easily as strong ones. And America's role in determining the future is far from certain.
I think there's now a certain loss of respect for the United States, a certain loss of fear.
We sit down with the people whose policies have shaped the modern world.
The West will defend its position and its values.
And take you to the flashpoints of a world in disarray.